President Trump has ordered millions of federal employees back to full-time office work, mandating that, quote, heads of all departments and agencies shall require employees to return to work in person at their respective duty stations. Joining us right now to discuss the state of work in the U.S., maybe across the globe, Glassdoor CEO Christian Sutherland Wong, and organizational psychologist. I call him really a behavioral psychologist. So I don't know what's the right term. Author and Becky Quick, a ski partner of Lindsey Vohn's, Adam Grant, who's just named Glassdoor's chief work-life expert. That was the tease. He just spent a day skiing with Lindsey Vonn. I thought that was worth mentioning. How you guys doing?
Doing great.
Let's talk about the state of work, because it does seem like there was a major shift or it feels like we're under a major shift right now in terms of just the power of workers, labor,
yes,
relative to management. Something, seemed to have shifted maybe 5 years ago in favor of management, or rather, I'm sorry, in favor of the employer,
workers,
employees.
Yeah.
And now it seems to be shifting back. What's happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly shifted back in the last couple of years that we've seen. Go back a couple of years, a huge demand, intensity of hiring. And then 2023, 24, that shifted back. And so now I think with that, and we've been talking about a lot at Davos, is that there's these new policies coming out as employers are back in the driver's seat around return to office, around changes to DEI policies. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Adam, you now have a new title. You're the chief work-life expert.
It's hopefully more than a title.
For these guys. So what does that mean?
So my job is basically to work with Glassdoor to figure out what are the most important trends affecting companies and employees and leaders, and how can we have better conversations that are data-driven.
Right.
Andrew, we've talked about this before, but one of my biggest frustrations with both corporate and government policy is people make choices based on opinion as opposed to based on evidence. And when we talk about return to office, for example, there was evidence pre-COVID that if you take a big government job, patent examiners were more productive when they worked fully remotely. And it's the kind of independent knowledge work that doesn't need to be co-located. And I worry that we're not learning from that kind of evidence. And so working with Glassdoor is a great opportunity.
One of the things that I keep hearing over and over from CEOs here, and I've been to now a number of dinners, cocktail conversations about this very topic, which is that the CEOs feel that during the pandemic, a lot of things got loosened up to try to help the worker, right? To make everything sort of work. But that meant shifting out deadlines, shifting out sort of performance. A lot of things got a little bit easier for everybody. And the question is whether that is helpful long-term or not. And a lot of them obviously are saying, get back to work. We can't do it that way forever.
I can't imagine that either or makes sense. So I feel like it's been a pendulum shift back and forth between, okay, we're going to care about people, we're going to care about performance. In the short term, there are trade-offs, but in the long term, what we know is caring about people is the best way to drive performance. And so when we study organizational culture, one of the things we see is there are some cultures that are more results-oriented and others that are more relationship-oriented. Ironically, if you are a results-oriented company and you bring in a relationship-oriented CEO, that CEO drives more value than if you had a fellow results-oriented leader, because they're bringing something that's absent.
What's the difference between, what's the difference between a results-oriented versus relationship-oriented?
It's basically people first versus performance or profits first. And I think the surprising lesson from that research is if you really care about maximizing profits, and that's what your culture has been all about, accountability first, then if you bring in somebody who puts people first, that's actually better for your profits.
And we see that same thing on Glassdoor in terms of, with Glassdoor, we're the world's leading platform for workplace transparency. And it's built on hundreds of millions of workplace reviews. And so we've studied it, looking at all the ratings and reviews. And then we've cross-referenced that with stock market performance. And it turns out the companies who do the best by their employees are actually the ones
How much
who
do
have
the CEOs call you up and say, I can't believe this is happening? I mean, this is a little bit like, people who put down reviews on TripAdvisor and the hotel can't believe that something terrible happened. Do you get a lot of complaints?
I get it, but I'd say rewind.
I mean, you're empowering the employees to actually tell people what's
Absolutely.
really going on.
And 10 years ago, when I first joined Glassdoor, I think people are all, their heads are in the sand, saying, "I hope this thing kind of goes away." And you fast forward 10 years to today, I think employers are much more constructive, and they start to really understand the whole premise of that if you engage your employees, it's actually good for business. And so the narrative has changed.
Let me ask you this: the other thing that happened in the last 5, 6, 7 years was obviously a move inside HR departments to develop DEI programs and the like. Mm-hmm. And there seems to be 3 things going on. There's some folks who are sticking with it. Maybe they haven't gotten a call from Robbie Starbuck yet. There's some who have completely abandoned it, or at least say they're abandoning it. And then there's a third group that says they're abandoning it, but actually is continuing it, just sort of rebranding it as something else. What do you think is really happening here?
Well, I mean, from our perspective, I think DEI is not just a fad that's kind of begun in 2020. If you go back to the beginning of Glassdoor 18 years ago, when we first started having workplace reviews, one of the key topics that people want to talk about was diversity. And so we've seen this trend over time where employees are wanting to talk about it, leadership are coming to the table to talk about it. I think Adam was saying, we're seeing maybe a pendulum swing back and you're seeing different reactions from different employers. But again, we've seen that the best employers who engage with their employees, who lean into diversity, are the ones who actually perform better as businesses. So I expect, that the conversation will be very different when we're meeting again a year or two from now.
Really? What do you think happens?
I think that there's danger right now of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So I think I've seen a lot of leaders get sort of mired in this zero sum. Well, if we make space for certain kinds of people with underrepresented backgrounds, then we're reverse discriminating against a historically privileged group. And that was not the original intent of this movement. It was to say we want to create opportunities for people who are motivated and talented but didn't have access. And we want to make sure that everybody has a sense of belonging. And I don't think those imperatives go away.
So I think, let me ask you this, and maybe we're going to get into like a little bit of treacherous, sensitive area. I think one of the things that has happened and that CEOs talk about is as they sought to diversify their staffs and things, they changed the parameters for the experience necessarily for some roles. They in some cases, they said, you know what, because we actually care about diversity in this instance, we're going to take somebody who maybe has a little bit less experience, who thinks is really a promising person. It may take us 6 months to get them totally ready, and that might be a little different than being able to hire somebody else who's plug and play, right? The plug and play person says, I can't believe this is happening if they, in fact, are not part of that diversity pool, right?
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I think if you look more broadly at the war for talent, and it's only going to get more and more intense as you have aging populations, lower birth rates in developed countries, you're going to have to figure out ways to engage a broader talent pool. And that's what I think many of these initiatives were about, of how do I tap into broader talent pools, because it is getting more and more intense for talent. So, I think that's when you kind of view this not just as something that's about social justice, but actually, again, this is about how do I perform better. I think this can make sense.